Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth Fireside Chat. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We actually have a fireside, the provost and I. Our guest has got a much more hip background in his studio, so it's fun to be here and be trying to create the same environment, albeit digitally, of our conversations at Grand Valley. I'm really excited about our fourth in this series. We have several hundred of you here with us today, and I think we have broken 1,000 in our 4 conversations with thought leaders in higher education about our future. This series that the provost and I have come together to co-host is really to reach out to those who can inspire us, who can bring us new thoughts, who can challenge our conventions and help us move forward into the future. And I have gotten to know Jaime over the years, and I'm really excited to have him as a guest today. I will not spoil the provost's introduction, so I'll just turn to her, and thank you, Maria, for sharing the fireplace with me again today.
Thank you. This is such a great event that the president initiated, so I'm really happy. This is the 4th, and I'm really happy to have Jaime here. Jaime Casap. Jaime, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did. Thank
you. Jaime has served as the Chief Education Evangelist at Google for more than 14 years and was the second member of the Google for Education team. In that time, Jaime launched Google's G Suite tools into higher education and K-12. He also launched Chromebooks into education and was the creator of the Google for Education Transformation Framework. He was also the creator of, he's partner in collaborating with higher education institutions, school systems, and businesses around the world, helping them build transformational policies and practices to elevate education and bring equity, diversity, and inclusion into their policies and practices. Jaime serves as an advisor to dozens of organizations focused on learning, skill development, and the future of work. He is the co-author of Our First Talk About Poverty as a way to talk to children about poverty, and is currently working on his next book, which will focus on his journey from the ghetto to Google and what it takes to be successful. So Jaime, we're really happy to have you today. I gave a very quick list of all of your accomplishments over the last decade or decade and a half, but we're really excited to learn your current thinking about higher ed, especially as we think about the digital world in new ways, and now we're in the midst of a pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you've prepared a few things for us, and then we'll take question and answer.
Yeah, I did, and thank you guys very much for having me. By the way, I've done, 2,000 Fireside Chats in my life. This is the first time I've actually seen a fire in the background for a Fireside Chat. So, and having 2 fires, I feel left out. But anyway, thank you very much for having me. So
you're in the valley, right?
I'm excited to be here. Well, here it's 90 degrees in Phoenix, so everything's on fire here, not just the fireplace. But welcome to my studio in Phoenix, Arizona. I was actually, this is my first week back. I was in Sedona for a couple of months writing a book, and I got some of it done. Not as much as I wanted to, but excited to be back, excited to be in Phoenix, excited to talk about this topic because I've been working with you guys for a little while now. And, one of the questions I get all the time is, how do you deal with the resistance to change? And my answer is usually, I have no idea, because I only work with people that want to change. And so you guys are brilliant to work with in terms of the direction which you want to bring Grand Valley, the direction in which you see higher education going. There's a lot of alignment there. So I want to talk about some of those things and how I see the world and especially higher education, because I think the things that we talk about is how do we get inclusion and diversity into a world of higher education? And you guys are on the right track when it comes to digitalization, when it comes to what we're thinking about in terms of programs and projects and support that we can do for students of color, for example. And we might get into some of that with the Q&A. But let me start with this idea of kind of where the world is. And I talk about this idea that we are in a world of digitalization. And by digitalization, I mean everything that has to do with technology, anything that's programmable, right? Machine learning, artificial intelligence, AR, VR, automation, robotics, all of that. And when we think about those concepts, when we think about those ideas or the Internet of Things, we think we're pretty hip, right? Here we are having this conversation using technology and being able to see each other face to face, and also bring in so many people to participate and interact with. But what we need to understand is digitalization has been growing gradually since, since the 70s, if you think about automation and what we could do with robotics, but slow growth. It's just been gradual, enough where we notice it, but not too much. For example, if you take a supermarket, we went from cashiers, labeling cans of goods with a label gun, and then, using a cash register. And I'm old enough to remember, to have a cashier's job, you had to know how to make change, right? You had to know what the difference was for, when giving back change. So we went from that to where all of a sudden the cash registers would tell you how much change to give, to scanning items on a scanner, to self-service checkout, and that progression happened slowly over time. We are now living in digitalization that is going to happen faster than we could ever imagine. But what we need to understand, let's start with this idea, is that we are at the very, 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 very beginning of this. This is caveman days when we think about technology as a whole. And I'll give you an example as to what I mean by that. If you take one of those super equations that they feed computers, right? So if you take one of those equations that spins around forever, and you feed that to the world's most powerful supercomputer today, it would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to process that equation. Google had a breakthrough a couple months before I left, where they did the same thing in 300 seconds. 10,000 years versus 300 seconds. We're at 10,000 years. We're at the very, very, very beginning. So as cool as we think we are, as technology is today, imagine what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And if we use the old mental model of thinking about that gradual change, we're not going to be able to predict what's coming. It's so much faster than that. Now, add to that the pandemic and what the pandemic has taught us in technology. I think you're not only going to see an exponential growth of digitalization, you're going to see a hockey stick growth of it. Because if you look at it from the private sector world, when you look at it from the governmental sector world, when you look at it from this idea that you think about the risk to your organization, what is the biggest risk to your company? What is your COO, your CEO of a big company, even a small company, what's the biggest risk? And the biggest risk that you discovered through this pandemic is people, the gathering of people, whether that's in a factory, manufacturing, whether it's in a call center, wherever people were doing process work in large groups of people together, that was a huge risk. So if you're a good business owner or a good COO, what you're going to do is you're going to double down on automation and robotics, for example. You're going to double down on artificial intelligence and machine learning so that you can eliminate that risk as much as possible, so that your business can continue and that you have technology to support situations like that we're in right now, because we're in a situation now. And the one thing we don't talk about is that this can happen again next year with a completely different virus, right? So this is the world that we're in now. And so what happens is digitalization is going to grow like a hockey stick. And we see this happening already. Take the supermarket example. In Singapore or South Korea, you're not going to have people working in those stores. They have already they've already moved to a model where people just check themselves out, or they're doing a robot delivery. So you just order everything online. Pretty soon robots will be putting things in delivery trucks and sending them to you. We're moving faster and faster. In movie theaters, they don't even have people working concession stands anymore. It's all self-service, all automated. So that's what's happening across the board. And that's happening faster and faster, right? So take the idea of Uber, for example. We already knew that Uber, this big market, was replacing taxis. And pretty soon, automation is going to replace Uber, right? 4.5 million people in this country make a living driving things, and you can buy a self-driving car today. What is that going to look like in 5 years? So this whole idea of automation, robotics, machine learning, artificial digitalization is impacting all industries across the board. So there's a couple of lessons that we need to pick up from that. Number one is we got to make sure our students understand this stuff, that they know what this is, that they know where it's going, that they know how to use this to solve problems that they're interested in solving, right? That's the first thing that we have to make sure we do, because you need to understand this. You need to understand digitalization. Doesn't mean everyone needs to be a computer scientist, although that would be nice, but you're not going to get anywhere in solutions in the business world if you don't understand cybersecurity, if you don't understand data management, if you don't understand any of the components that we just talked about, artificial intelligence and machine learning, how to take advantage of that, how to use that as that continues to grow. For example, I'm sitting here in downtown Phoenix, and if I needed to get to the airport and I had to come up with a solution to get me from here to the airport, but I don't know that cars exist, what kinds of solutions would I come up with? I might come up with a great solution to walk there. I might come up with a timetable or what the right way to do it safely, but I'll never come up with the best solution because I don't understand that cars exist. That's the same, that's true with digitalization. Any solution that we come up with is going to have a digitalized component to it. So that's number one. The second thing that we need to think about in higher education is this idea that if we're teaching students things that machines can do better, are we teaching students the right things? And not just what machines can do today, but understanding this future and understanding that this is going to continue to grow. So what else are machines going to be able to do that humans currently do? So if we're teaching them that, that's probably not a good strategy. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're teaching them the skills that they need for the jobs that are available. So this is the balancing act that we have to do in higher education. How do we make sure that we're teaching them the skills that they need to go out and get a job or start a career or do something, and at the same time, having them understand that they need additional skills given how fast the world is changing. And I think the secret ingredient to all that is to teach students the skills that they need, to get them on a career path, to understand digitalization and the role it plays. And it's not an either or, it's an and double down on the human skills. Double down on the things that we're going to need to do. I call them human skills. We used to call them 21st century skills. I don't like that phrase because one, we're 20 years into the 21st century, and two, it makes it sound like it's in the future. You know, you need skills for the 21st century as if the 21st century is down there when we're in it right now. My 6-year-old needs 21st century skills, right? So I call them human skills. What are those skills? We've been talking about them for a long time. Problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, the ability to learn, creativity, some combination of that package. And when my 6-year-old leaves for school every day, those are the skills that I want her to know. Subjects matter, like we just talked about, learning skills, learning digitalization, learning subject matters, those things are important. But the way we double down on those, building those skills, is using this platform. How do we do problem solving while we're learning technology? How do we do critical thinking as we're learning accounting? How do we do collaboration as we're learning world history? That combination of development where you're learning content, you're learning skills, and at the same time, you're doubling down on these human skills, which are going to be critical because these are the ones that machines can't do. And so we got to make sure that we're helping our students do that, building those skills for that future so that they can combine both. Now, again, subjects matter, but building the skills matter just as much. So it's not this battle that we have some time with. Should it be a technology-based curriculum or should it be a humanities-based curriculum? The answer is both, right? That's the answer. And so for me, I think that for students, I don't think you can get a better opportunity to learn those things at the same time than in universities. And why I'm working with you guys and I'm working in the higher education space is because I believe that the value proposition of higher education is even more tremendous today than it's been in the past. That today we need higher education to help our students do that, develop skills that they need for career and double down on those human skills in a safe environment, in a productive environment. So for example, students can come to a university, they come to Grand Valley, for example, and what they find are expertise. They find people who know subject matter. They find people who can help them curate and make sense of all the information that they're faced with. All that happens on a higher education campus. And at the same time, they can learn how to problem solve and be critical thinkers and collaborate, all that. Now, I think what we need to do more than anything, the other value proposition to me for higher education is this idea of the ability to learn. Our students need to know how to learn. And you don't start developing those skills until you go to college, right? In K-12, they tell you you're going to write a 5-page paper and you're going to do it this way and you're going to write this many words and it's going to be on this topic. Where in higher education, you start managing your own time, you start managing your own learning ability. We need to do that much earlier, but that's a K-12 problem. In higher education, we can teach our students how to learn, how to constantly learn. And I think it starts with self-awareness, self-assessment, right? This idea that you can learn anything given the space that we're in. And on a college campus, you can learn anything. I hear from adults all the time that say things like, I'm not very creative. I'm not good with technology. That's my favorite one, when people say, I'm not tech savvy. I'm just not good with technology. My response to those adults, this isn't even students. My response to these adults, and this is why I don't have a lot of friends, my response is, no, you've chosen not to be creative. You've chosen not to be good with technology, because everything that you need to be good at technology is out there. It's just a choice that you make. Just like I don't say I'm a bad cook. I've chosen not to be a good cook. And there's a difference between those two things. The difference is I've chosen not to be a good cook. I've chosen, my level of skill is I can make a bobbly pizza, right? Like that's my jam right there, making a pizza. I can make a pizza. Can I make lasagna? Absolutely not. But I've chosen not to be good at lasagna. If I wanted to learn how to make lasagna, I can. And that mentality, that mindset of I can learn anything is the value proposition of higher education, because you can point a student into any direction and learn anything. So this idea of being able to build skills and have this opportunity to learn whatever you want, when you want, at the pace you want, those two things to me is where the future of education needs to rely on. And then I want to say one more thing, and then we can answer any questions that you guys might have. The one important thing, and Maria and I, you and I have talked about this idea of these 21st century skills and the foundation of digitalization being around this concept of the digital knowledge that students need. We've given this generation a pass. We call them digital citizens. We say that they are naturally gifted somehow in using technology. And the truth is that they're not very good at this. And so for me, being able to teach our students how to use these tools, teach them how to take advantage of these tools, to teach them how they can take these tools and solve the problems that they're passionate about. Because given this future, I think the most important thing that higher education can do is partner with students around this concept of what they're going to do in the future, right? So oftentimes we ask our students, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? I've heard people ask my 5-year-old that question, 6-year-old that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Again, thinking about all this world and what's happening and where we're going with technology and digitalization, that question doesn't make sense anymore. By the way, it didn't make sense a while ago. We're just starting to realize it doesn't make sense. As an example, when I graduated high school, when I graduated college, when I graduated graduate school, there was no way for those institutions to prepare me to work in technology on the internet and at Google. There's just no way for those institutions to prepare me. Why? Because the internet and Google didn't exist when I graduated from those institutions. And so this idea that we know what's coming and that jobs are stable is something that we got to get used to, because that's not true. So what we need to do instead is ask our students, what problem do you want to solve? What's the problem that spins in your head? Come here to this university and we're going to help you solve that problem. Now, how do you want to solve it? How do you want to take your gifts, your talents, your experiences and solve that problem? Oh, you don't know what your gifts and talents are? We're going to help you figure that out. We're going to help you nail down what your talents are, what your gifts are, where your passions are. And then we're going to take that problem that you're passionate about, take those gifts. And then the third question is, what do you need to know to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? We're going to help you develop those knowledge, skills, and abilities so that you can solve the problem that you're passionate about in the way you want to solve it. And that right there is why my 19-year-old is in college, why my 28-year-old graduated from college, and why my 6-year-old is going to go to college. And I don't want to hear that they don't need to go to college, because they do. So I'll stop. I'll pause there and answer questions that you guys might have.
Thanks, Jaime. We've got a lot of good questions coming in the Q&A, and keep them coming for Jaime. He's left lots of time for us, which is awesome. So one of the questions, Jaime, is that you expanded on what we teach. Can you give us some of your thoughts on how we teach?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is an important question, because how we teach matters. And I think from an early age, we need to let our students' curiosity drive how they learn. Every student is different. I get that. There are definitely models where you can take an inquiry-based solution, for example, and let kids drive through questions that they're passionate about or interested in. But the important thing is to use what students are bringing to the table. The how part is important. And again, if we're looking at those critical skills that our students need, one way is through being able to do their own learning, right? Being able to drive the learning, and then to do it through a collaborative manner. I talk to lots of students who somehow they believe that they have to put up with group work in college, and that they'll never have to work with other people, and they just can't wait to graduate so they don't have to work with other groups again. The reason why isn't because the students don't like other people or other students. The reason is because we've taken the work and we've made it group work. This is what I mean. For example, take a typical college class. You might assign a paper to 5 students or 4 students. Okay, you form groups, you 4, you're going to write a paper on X. What ends up happening is one student writes the paper and the other 3 pay that student, right? That's how I paid for beer through my college experience. That model is not collaborative work, right? How do we create real collaborative work where everyone's piece, no one else can do anyone else's piece? It would be missing if they didn't show up, right? This idea that we can do a collaborative project. And the only way we can do that is by understanding our students. So school here in Phoenix that I helped build, called the Phoenix Coding Academy. So this is a computer science high school in the middle of downtown Phoenix. And this is a regular high school, but we brought a lot of these principles into the school. And one of the principles is that when the students show up to school, and we're 4 years in now, we're going to go in our 5th year. We had our first graduating class. But when students start at the school, the first thing that we do is we do an assessment. We do an assessment to understand where their strengths are and where their areas of development are and where their interests are. And what we want to know is to basically have a roadmap of who they are, so that when we form teams, when we do collaborative work, we don't put 4 detailed people on a team together. We don't put 4 big thinkers on a team together, because nobody's going to get any work done, right? It's this idea of combining the right skills on a team, and you need to understand it. And it's the same thing in the world of work, right? As a manager, you have to know your team enough to know how to put the right team together to do something, right? It's very much like coaching. It's like football coaching. It's understanding who the right 11 players need to be on the field given the situation. So we need to rethink how we do collaborative work on campus. And we have to let curiosity drive a lot of their learning, right? So one of the games that I play with my 6-year-old is I want to know how long it would take me to answer one of her questions. You know, the bad parental advice that I've gotten in my life is when a student asks you, when a kid asks you a question, like my 6-year-old asks, hey, where does the water go when you drain the bathtub? The answer is supposed to be, well, where do you think it goes, right? And I never liked that answer because it's condescending, and it's also like, I know and you don't know, and I'm gonna beat up on you if you don't know. Whatever situation you're in, my answer to my 6-year-old is, that's a great question. Let's go find out. And then I see how long it would take me to answer that question. Sometimes I can go 4 hours answering that question because I would start with, wait, before we figure out where the water goes, what is water? Where does it come from? Why do some clouds have water and some don't? And we can dive deep into those questions. And there is no difference between doing that with a 6-year-old or doing that with an 18 or 19-year-old and letting them drive their learning that way. What universities can provide, what instructors and professors can provide is the guidance, is the coaching. And so how do we turn our professors, how do we turn our teachers from facilitators, from like referees that, you know, test our students and give them grades, to being real coaches where they can be in there and help guide our students? And I think that to me is the big concept around the how do we teach? How do we let curiosity teach? How do we let collaboration teach? How do we let students learn and teach with each other? Because that's the way they're going to be working in the real world anyway.
That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit, not everybody has the same access to the digital tools and instruments. So talk a little bit about how we best address these kinds of learnings and opportunities within a digital divide.
Yeah, the digital divide is real, and it goes deeper than just having access to technology, right? It goes into how we use this. So for example, here's the thing. The reason I got into technology and education 15 years ago is because I grew up with a single mother. I grew up on welfare and food stamps. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York, old school Hell's Kitchen from the 70s and 80s. And I get to talk to you guys because of education. What I saw when I saw technology was, oh, wow, we can bring education to a whole new level. We can bring education to places that we couldn't even imagine. And I have to be honest that in the 15 years, I've been disappointed with how far we've gotten. Because when I was a kid, if you asked me a simple question like, what happened on December 7th, 1941? If I didn't know, I'd say, I don't know, but I will be back tomorrow and I'll tell you. Because I had to go look for that answer. Most kids had encyclopedias. I didn't even have encyclopedias. Well, we would have the M, right? Like every year the salesman would come by and we would pick up, my mother would buy the M for like $9.89, and we never had it in the other one. So if you asked me an M question, I usually knew the answer, but I would have to go to the library. And this public library, we closed at 5 o'clock. It wasn't open on the weekends. And if you can find a book, you wouldn't be able to find it because it was never on the shelf. It was because it wasn't my library, it was everyone's library. So for me, to get to an answer took forever to get to that answer. Technology gives us the opportunity to get to that answer quickly. And so we don't have to worry about the answer. We can worry about the why. We can worry about why it happened. We can worry about whether it happens, it's going to happen again. We can dive deeper into the questions because we have access to technology. So having access is part one, right? Just having a device, having a laptop, having a device to get to the internet is half the battle. And that digital divide is closing. Absolutely. It's a temporary solution around the world, right? And still, you know, we think about technology as being part of our society, and only 50% of the world is online. So let's keep that in mind. On a global scale, we're just beginning. But here in the United States, you can have almost everyone has a phone. Almost everyone has access. That's only half the battle. The real issue is how we use those tools. So for example, if you look at K-12, you have school districts. If you take two schools, one in a rich community, one in a poor community, they could both have access to laptops or Chromebooks or iPads or whatever it is that they have. And there's still a digital divide, because the digital divide is how we use these tools. Because in rich school districts, you might have more experienced teachers who know how to use the technology and use it in enriching ways. And in poor school districts, you might have inexperienced teachers, or you might find the technology being used to do repetitive tasks or do worksheets. And so even though access you think is the issue, it's not even the issue. The real issue is how we use that technology. What do we do with that technology? Here's the good news. The good news is that all the information out there on how to be a good digital citizen, on how to be good with technology, it's all out there. Google puts it out there, Facebook, LinkedIn, there's all these great guides on how to be good with technology, how to search the right way. There's blogs and professors and books and courses and lots of online stuff that's free to be good using technology. So we can close that gap too, but that gap is what I worry about, because what we're seeing is just because we think we have access, because we have a device in front of us, does not mean we actually know what to do with it or how to use it effectively.
And we saw that play out with the pandemic, where, you know, as people just kept cut over to remote or digital, depending on where they were at, the adaption and adoption of, you know, utilizing it in ways that people learn was really quite different, you know, across those school districts. So kind of given COVID and where we are right now, are there things that you think about as solutions that can be proposed to school to sort of accelerate that adoption rate and close that digital divide?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. For those of us that have been talking about equity issues and access issues, especially when it comes to technology, we've been screaming about this for years, and finally we can actually see it, right? So I say this, it's a little controversial, but the truth is that the greatest thing to happen in education is the pandemic, because you can start seeing some of the big gaps. We can start seeing some of the holes. You can start seeing some of the things that we took for granted, both in K-12 and in higher education. And not just those involved in education, but even the outside world. I have a friend who's a high school teacher, and she was shopping. She had a high school jacket on, and she was shopping, and she was online, and somebody walked by her and said, "Thank you," and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for your service." Like she was in the military, right? This idea that there's an appreciation for educators now, given that the world. So lots of positive things have happened. What I'm interested in now is what we do with the information, what we do next. How do we resolve some of these issues? And so I think some of the things that we can do right off the bat is an understanding. In K-12, for example, we have an opportunity to teach our students those digital skills, to teach them how to learn on their own, to teach them how to be good at finding information and making sense of information and taking information and converting it into intelligence. And there's lots of stuff out there that can help us that, right? What we can't do is say, we're supposed to be here, so let's ignore all that and let's just find a way to get to wherever it is that we're supposed to be. Like this idea that we've been talking about the COVID slide, students falling behind. But when you really when you really think about that, what are they falling behind in? Right? Like what's the metric that we're using? Like, you know, my 6-year-old can't read, but she can read, but what level is she? Like that idea of being at a certain level by a certain age is from the old world, right? And it comes really from a testing world. The standardized test says that by 6th grade, you should be doing these things because we're going to test you on those things. But the reality is everyone learns at a different level and learns different things and has different levels of intelligence and different meaning for that word. So it's rethinking what that looks like. So number one is, how do we assess our students? How do we assess their progress? How do we make sure that they're learning the things that they want to learn, but they're learning them correctly in using the tools and using the skills that we want them to build, right? So that's one of the things that we can do up front. In higher education, what we need to do is understand our students and start looking at solutions that are beyond just taking the curriculum and bringing it online. And some professors are being very good with this, and others are, you know, quite frankly, panicking and trying to, instead of teaching 50 students in class, they're now teaching 50 students online. And not all 50 students are going to react the same way, right? My 19-year-old told me a story about how he got up to go get water and got in trouble for getting water, right? Because that professor wants him online on the entire time, because if they're not, as if him being there looking at the screen is an indication of engagement, right? So rethinking what that engagement looks like, rethinking the opportunities that we have for our students, instead of trying to jam all the education into our students at the same time. Like my 19-year-old is struggling right now because he doesn't want to sit there for 6 hours and take classes. He's just not good that way. Whereas someone like me, if you say, listen, you don't have to go anywhere, you just have to stay in your studio and never leave, I think I'm in heaven, right? So this idea that we have to look at our students, understand who they are, assess who they are and what they're good at, and create a customized plan for them is important. So my 19-year-old would be much better learning, yes, taking a couple online classes and then going out and doing some experiential learning, going out and doing some kind of service project, going out and being out in the community and participating because he needs that for him. And I bet he's not the only student. So how do we customize experiences for our students depending on who they are, depending on the assessments that we do on them? And I think that to me is one of the most important things that we can do for our students, is help them understand who they are.
Right. Maria, I'm going to turn to you to see, I know I've got the job of reading the questions and our colleagues are putting a lot of interesting questions out there, but I want to be sure you have a moment if you'd like to ask anything of Jaime.
Sure, of course. You know, one of the things that we've talked about, Jaime, in the past is this intersection of the digital and underrepresented groups and the education thereof. And I know you touched a little bit on that with the digital divide, but I also know you see technology and digitalization as a way of empowerment too. Do you want to just give us a few points?
Yeah. Well, so here's what's interesting. That's a great question because, you know, when I try to talk to as many students, and I got an opportunity to talk to many students through Grand Valley this summer, but I get a chance to talk to lots and lots of students. And I love to talk to students, especially students who are growing up the way I grew up. Because one of the questions I get all the time from these students is, how do I get a job at Google, right? And my response is, forget Google. That's not, don't get a job at Google. Make a company that Google buys, right? Like that should be the goal. And if you get a job at Google, great, but try that first. And the reason I bring that up is because we are living in extraordinary times when it comes to the way we work. So let's understand, when it comes to communities of color, the African American market is $1 trillion market. The Latino market is $1 trillion market. The opportunity as an African American or as a Latino to build products and services for those communities the opportunity has never been greater than it is now because of digitalization, the opportunity that it gives us. Anyone with a laptop can pick up a laptop and start a business, can start a project, can start work. That is the empowerment of digitalization that we have, where you don't need what you used to need. If I wanted to start a business when I was 20 years old, I'd have to go get a storefront, and I would have to get inventory and supplies, and I would have to get a cash register and employees, and I have to lease space and find out what the community needed. Today, anyone with a laptop can pick up with a really good idea and start a business. Any two students can start a business. And I see it happen every day. I talk to another startup that's doing that. And so those entrepreneurial skills, especially for our most vulnerable communities, our communities of color, if we can start teaching those communities that it's not about a job, but the opportunity for them to create their world and build products and services for the worlds that they live in, especially if there's issues and problems that they want to solve that's part of their community, that they can do that by themselves. And that is one of the things that's missing. So I go around the country talking to students, especially students growing up like I did, with this idea that it isn't about getting skills to get a job. That's fine, but it's more about developing the knowledge, skills, and abilities to start something, to start a business, to get Google to buy you, because Google isn't Google. Google is a company that's made up of the last 22 companies that they bought, the last 60 companies that they bought. And so this idea of using digitalization to help students do that, it has a tremendous, the opportunity is tremendous for our students to be able to do that. Unlike any other time in history, if you were a person of color and you had to go work at a company, it would take you twice as long to move up the ranks. Today, you can start your own. And that's what we need to encourage our communities to do. And so I would love for Grand Valley or any other university to have the support, like to make sure we're teaching entrepreneurial skills and to make sure we have an incubating system so that students can take an idea and try to grow with that idea, to be able to connect them with investors and people in the local community and in the national community that are interested in helping those students grow that community. Using digitalization to grow your network, right? So on my YouTube channel, I have 2 videos on how to link in, how to communicate on LinkedIn, because everyone is terrible at it. So here's an opportunity to connect with people across the world that share your interests, your passions. And so I think that teaching our students, our Black and Latino students, for example, how to really take advantage of digitalization, that's what the X factor is as we grow these communities out of poverty and out of social issues that they're dealing with, that we can use technology to help us with that.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to read this one, Jamie, because I think it's really said quite well. It says, Jamie, you pose a difficult paradox. Follow your passion, but when I was 20 years old, I didn't know what I needed to know. I trusted the educational system to know what I needed to know. Is education to become buffet-like? Learn what you want when you want it. Is pursuing the problem I want to solve the way to a career?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm glad you read it because there's a lot to unpack there. First, I don't like the word career, because if you read the definition of career, it's you spend X number of years working in a certain industry. And that is true for a handful of industries, whether you are a professor, an educator, someone who with a PhD, someone who's a doctor, someone who's a lawyer. There's very specific, even lawyer you can have different careers, but it's for a handful of people. The word career means you do something for a very long time. My last YouTube video that I posted, when I left Google, I got a lot of feedback and questions, and a lot of the questions were, what's next? What's the next thing you're going to do? And my YouTube video was, there is no next thing. There's like 10 next things. And that's what I wanted to do 10 different things at the same time. And I think I can handle it. And so far I'm doing well with it. But this idea of having a career doesn't even make sense. So no, I actually think the reverse is true. I think higher education can help students identify what they need to know. So here's the difference. Yes, I wish when I was 20, I knew the problem that I wanted to solve. I knew it was in public policy. I knew it was something to do with education. I knew that, but I didn't know specifically what it was. I wish also that I knew a little bit more about myself and the way I work and what I like to work on and how I like to think about work and the types of assessments that you can do online today for free. Those types of things would have been helpful when I'm 20 years old. I didn't rely on the education system to tell me what I'm supposed to know. What I think higher education can do is help students, not so much with a buffet of options, but to help them narrow down what that best buffet looks like based on who they are. So you can still use the same analogy of a buffet of different options. The difference is what kind of diet plan you're on. You know what kind of nutritional strategy you have. And so higher education, because they know you, they're going to help you pick the right things from the buffet. And I think that's what we need to do. So this idea that, yes, it's not about a career, it's about a problem that you want to solve. And the reason why problem is important is because there's a million ways to solve a problem. So if a student comes to you and they say, I don't know specifically what it is, but I want to solve climate change. And so you might be inclined to say to them, oh, climate change. Oh, you need to study environmental studies or environmental science. You need to get a degree in global sustainable development. Yes, there's thousands of ways to solve the problem that way. But what if you are an amazing photographer? What if you're an amazing writer? What if you're an amazing educator? My 19-year-old is going to be an educator. I can tell. He doesn't even know it yet, but he's going to be. What if those are where your strengths are? What if those where your passions are, your gifts are? The way you can solve climate change then isn't to go out and get a degree in environmental studies, although you might need to. The way you can solve climate change is by going out and documenting climate change. If you're a gifted educator, the way you can solve climate change is by going out and creating a program for climate change, an educational program, an experiential program in climate change. That's the way you can solve that problem. So it's What's the problem that you want to solve? How do you want to solve it with your gifts, your talents, your experiences, your passions? And then, and this is where higher education comes in, what do you need to solve that problem? And I think the expertise that higher education brings and the knowledge of being able to curate all that information that's out there for higher education and say, okay, so that's your, okay, that's where your world is. All right, here are some photography classes that you need to start with. Here are some advanced classes you need to take. Here are some environmental science classes you should be taking. Here are some other classes you should be taking. Oh, you should be reading this book. Oh, you should be subscribed to this website. Oh, you should be, and creating this program that fits both worlds from the buffet where I can do that. And here's the second part of this, which is this idea that we don't stop, right? I remember sitting in the computer lab at ASU. I'm graduating with my graduate degree. And I remember sitting in that computer lab. I didn't have my own computer. Typing up my last 60-page paper on my WordPerfect 5.1 software package, hitting print to my dot matrix printer. So I had like 45 minutes to kill for that thing to print out. And I sat there going, I am done. I'm done. I'm done learning. I never have to learn again, right? That wasn't true 25 years ago when I graduated. It is absolutely not true today. So the buffet never closes. So what I think the value of higher education is, and especially when you partner with a university, is that you can keep going back to the buffet. You have a subscription model to the buffet where you just keep going back and learning more and more and more, because we're not done learning. The ability to learn, this is what I tell students all the time, that you can learn something all day for 12 hours and then go to bed and wake up and start all over again, that your brain doesn't fill up. And so the world that we live in now is that we need real lifelong learning. So it's not just the buffet of things that get you started, it's checking in on the buffet as you're going through life, making sure that you keep building the skills. So for me, I would love to go back to my university and say, this is what I'm doing today. This is where I am. What else do I need to know? And for my university to say, even at 52 years old, oh, these are the 3 classes that you should be taking right now, right? And so that's the opportunity that we have in front of us.
There are so many good questions, so I apologize to my colleagues that we're not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to try to pick and choose maybe topics we haven't quite touched on yet. So one is, how do we prepare our students to think about the ethical dimensions of technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so if you go to my Twitter feed, by the way, if there's questions that don't get answered, just ask me on Twitter, or just my message button on Twitter is open. Hit me up. I just posted on Twitter a couple of days ago. My daughter asked me, my 6-year-old asked me about when Dia de los Muertos was, right? And so I said to Siri, I said, hey Siri, sorry, it turned on, but I said, hey blank, when is Dia de los Muertos? And Siri came back with, today's date is Thursday, October 29th. And then I said, hey, the other one, Google, when is Dia de los Muertos? And it came back with, it's November 1st through November 2nd. 2 giant technology companies worth billions of dollars. One of them can answer the question and the other one can't, right? And so I turned to the camera and I said, so if we're gonna use technology and diversity and inclusion issues, then we're gonna need to bring diversity and inclusion into technology. Right. And so there's huge issues when it comes to diversity and inclusion in technology. Who is ever building the technology that's what's going to be represented. So we definitely need diversity and inclusion in technology. But back to what I said earlier, it's not just about hiring Black and Latinos at companies like Google and Apple. It's about giving the digital power to those Black and Latinos to create technology, to build things that Google buys or Apple buys that gets incorporated into what they do. So it's the combination of both. It's the hiring practices, but it's also building the technology for those communities by people who look like those in that community. So that's number one. The second thing around the ethics of it, look, ethics have been an issue for forever, right? And absolutely, there are bigger issues when it comes to technology. I am one of those weird technology people that do think that technology needs to be regulated. I do think that they play an important role in society. And I don't go to Facebook anymore. Facebook is to me a wasteland. Like I think Facebook missed an amazing opportunity to be a platform that brought news and information and it was credible. And I think they missed it because they didn't want to be regulated. They didn't want to be responsible for what people posted on their site. I think that was a mistake, and I think we'll correct it over time.
So one last question, and then I'll flip it to our provost to close out this session. If we are thinking about equity, we can't sit and receipt in colleges and universities of the students that are coming. So what's our role with K through 12 as a college and university in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that whoever said that has nailed the issue, right? Which is this idea that you can't just sit there and wait, that you need to play a role. So I would say it goes beyond just getting involved in K-12. And also, we've been talking about this. What is your recruiting process? What is your marketing strategy? Who is it that you're talking to? How are you reaching students? Where are you reaching students? How are you assessing students, right? So, I graduated from, I'm being honest, right? I graduated from SUNY Brockport. If I graduated from SUNY Brockport when I started working at Google in 2006, there's just no way I'd work at Google, right? Just no way. I only work at Google because of the experiences I had since graduating. And so being able to assess people for the skills that they bring, for the talents that they bring, for the gifts that they bring, beyond their transcript or what school they went to or what the name was of school. We can be more, that's too simplistic. People are complex. And so how do we assess complexity of a human being is something that we should investigate and look at. So one, let's say we did all the great work in K-12, we still at the university level have to know how are we reaching out to students? How are we creating programs for our students? How are we creating support mechanisms for our students, especially our students of color who come with different cultural backgrounds, right? So, I know this girl who lives in South Phoenix, and she actually got into one of the Ivy League schools. I won't call out the school. And when she went to her father and said, hey, she was going to go on a full scholarship, or at least most of it paid for, she went to her father and said, hey, I got into this school. And his response was, I can't afford that. Didn't know that he didn't have to pay for it. And the second part was, you can't go to that school. You got to stay here and take care of your brothers and sisters. So there's cultural elements to this that's beyond the just recruiting and can you come to our school? There's things that we need to think about. How do we bring that school to her? How do we create more of a partnership with local communities so that we can do some more work in that space? So there's lots we can do in that space. Now, when it comes to K-12, I think you're right. I think we do need to get involved early. And I think that the earlier you can get students onto campuses, and the president did a great job with the high school program, getting students. I guarantee you all of those students that we worked with this summer had an amazing experience. They will never forget that experience. Imagine doing that 10x, right? Where you can bring students in on campus from all over different schools where they can have that experience, right? So this idea that if you take a sixth grader and bring them on campus, even for a day program, that's just going to resonate. That's just going to stick. So creating more those types of programs where we get into the community and we bring students on campus, where we bring college students out into those communities to work with those students. We need to do more of that. Like my 19-year-old is yet to go visit a sixth grade classroom. Why?
Jamie, I said it was the last question, but there's one from Grateful 2020 that says, love your ideas, believe in them. What's the next thing that I can do to help this movement? Then I'll 60 seconds so Maria can close.
Yeah, so I think that getting involved is half the battle, right? It's not just the idea, but what can you do with the idea? What's your role in that idea? And I think we all have a role to play, whether you're a parent, a professor, a faculty member, a student, whoever you are, you have a role to play. And I think with the power comes from a community. So it's the first thing I do is go find other people who believe the thing that you believe in and start working together on something, right? Bring those ideas up front. You got to remember this, that this is a little bit of a revolution, right? That we're on here. And no revolution is without casualties. And so being able to stand up and be able to understand that you might fall a couple of times is half the battle. And so going and getting involved in whatever program, again, I'd start with the simple question: what problem do you want to solve? This works for adults too. How do you want to use what you currently do to solve that problem? And what else do you need to know to solve that problem? Start there.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Maria.
Thanks, Jamie. Your passion and excitement is palpable for all of us. We're really grateful that you're willing to spend some time with us today to talk about those issues that are really close to our hearts. You know, one of the things I was thinking about throughout all of your talk and the question answer is, what's the common thread? And it's transformation. And, you know, the idea that we're all educators here is really driven by the fact that we want to transform people's lives. And so we just really appreciate your contribution to that. Thank you so much. For those of you on the call, you might have noticed Jamie referenced that he and I have talked earlier. He's helping us think about digital skills. And so I'm sure if we asked, Jamie would be happy to come back. Isn't that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah, how can you say no, right?
No, I can't say no.
That's right. So let me know if people are interested in having Jamie come back in smaller settings, perhaps. But we do really appreciate your insight and just helping us think a little bit differently. So thank you so much.
Can I just close out one more quick thought, because this is important. The impact that you guys have on students isn't just in the students that you face. It goes on for generations and generations and generations. And that is the most meaningful thing that we do in education, is the impact that we have on students that you will never meet in your entire life.
Thank you, Jamie. It's wonderful being with you again, and thanks for working so closely with us at Grand Valley.
Thank you. Excited to work with you guys.
Have a great day.